Hello, hello. We are a couple of minutes late because we got distracted talking about things that are not relevant to the stream at all. But welcome to our second episode of the Emily Henry Book Club. I think it was last week that Laura and I talked about Funny Story and Beach Read. We've been busy in the meantime. I read Happy Place and we've recruited a new member.
Indeed. Recruitment is a very kind word. I just bullied my way into this. So
we're more than happy to have you, Evie. So all the bullying is fully allowed.
Yeah, we're spreading the joy.
I will say, just to get this out of the way, so I had read Beach Read like in 2020, 2021.
Yeah.
Soon after it came out. And that was the end of it. And then I read Happy Place on Wednesday. Started Wednesday night. Read it all the way through in one setting until almost 3 o'clock in the morning. And then I subsequently read the rest of Emily Henry's bibliography and finished the, what was it? Book Lovers was the last one I had to do.
Yeah.
Sunday morning. So
it's live.
I've also been busy.
Yeah.
So
this book, it's the book to get you sucked in because it is the best book.
So good.
Oh, I love this book. I ended up rereading this book last week when Evie also read it. So I've now read it twice in the month of May.
It's so funny because I think in the last live stream that we did, Evie, you were in the chat and we agreed to buddy read Happy Place. And then I woke up the next morning to your review of Happy Place.
Sorry, not sorry. Yeah. I did warn you. I'm like, I'm the worst buddy reader. I'm so sorry.
Well, it's not only that, but this book, I feel like it just sucks you in so immediately. And that's not to say that other Emily Henry books don't necessarily do that. But I do feel if we're looking at the 5 books that kind of take place in this universe, that Happy Place is the most immediately gripping, like right off the bat, other than maybe Funny Story. I feel like Funny Story has such a great arc that can pull you in right away. But I think people kind of get misled with the, second chance romance trope. And they're like, I'm not really, like that was Yolanda's thing. She was like, I'm not really super into second chance romance. So I haven't read it yet. And then the second I opened this book, the banter from the beginning was so good and just absolute perfection that I messaged Yolanda and I was like, you need to read this right now because it's going to be my favorite of the bunch. I just know it. And I love this book. I love this book so much. I'm just like hugging it to imbue all of my positive feelings further into its pages. But oh man, I don't think I have had a more visceral reaction to a book in such a long time. And I never would have thought that I would be saying that about a contemporary romance novel. But I almost feel like this shouldn't be labeled as contemporary romance because I just feel like it's a life book. It's just one of those books where I'm like, this is just life that she's crammed into 300 pages is it 300 pages or is it more? It's 388 pages of life cramming and just perfection. 5 stars, 10 out of 10, everything. Love it so much.
Yeah. I think what you just said was what I was thinking when I was reading it and when I finished it. Like, I feel like on the one hand, the contemporary romance label doesn't quite capture what this book is because I didn't really love it necessarily because of the romance as like, swoon, like romance. There's nothing wrong with that, but like there's so much more to this book. On the other hand, it also just is a great showcase of what contemporary romance can do when it's really good. Like, I feel like this would be a great book for someone who is skeptical about contemporary romance. To be honest, like all of Emily Henry's books, but this one
as an example.
Yeah, Evie is a prime example of conversion with Happy Place. Evie started with less Happy Place with her beach read experience and converted with Happy Place. So yeah, just so good. I love this book. Can't wait to talk all about it.
Yeah, I think I don't know, maybe one of you two mentioned it when we were briefly talking about it, or maybe it was Angela, I don't know. But someone had mentioned that Emily Henry is like draws the line between like genre romance and women's fiction, whatever women's fiction is.
That was me. Yeah.
And I think that's a really good way to describe her writing. Like, it's not, I mean, yes, she does engage with tropes and stuff like that, but there's a lot more depth to her world, her characters, the motivations, that type of thing. Not to say that there's not that in other romances, but I'm just going based on my experience, which is limited. So
mine is too. So
Same.
I mean, Emily Henry was my first exposure to contemporary romance. I've since read 4 novels by Abby Jimenez, but I feel like I get really hung up on the labeling of women's fiction just because of the fact that I feel her character work is so excellent. And we don't talk about her in the same way that we would talk about like an Abercrombie or Robin Hobb, that we are so enigmatic about in the fantasy community. We're like, oh, these people know how to do character work. But if you're looking at First Law, for example, that's 9 books of like getting to know characters and getting to know the world. Emily Henry does that in less than 400 pages with multiple characters that you feel you fully know them. You understand their motivations.
Yeah.
Yes, you're connected to them. You find them relatable. And I feel like she doesn't only do that for the female main character, which is something if like you read a lot of romantasy, you're more likely going to have that general connection and understanding to the female protagonist. But in her books, I feel so connected to the male protagonist as well, or the male counterpart, just because you understand them. And I feel like she does a phenomenal job at just character work across the board. And I wish she was getting more recognition in general for that, rather than just being kind of like lumped into categories of where we want to place her books. I just wish we could have like a character writer category. And I feel like she would be in that category too, because so good.
Yeah, and to further on that, I think she's really also really good at fleshing out the secondary characters. Like,
yes,
Cleo, Sabrina, they're just as motivated and feel just as real and tangible as characters as, I almost said Nora. That's
Harriet and Wynne. Yeah,
Harriet. Yeah, there we go. I just read Book Lovers, so that was the first thing that was in my mind. Not Nora. Not Nora.
Harriet, yeah.
But they're also, I mean, I felt connected to every single character in this book. And it wasn't just cardboard, like, here, place yourself in this character. They felt very real. So
I agree.
Yeah. Like, as we were all reading it or rereading it, we were talking about it like briefly on Discord, and like there's something that you can relate to out of each character because they feel like real rounded people. So you're not like, oh yeah, this character is 100% me and this one's not me. It's like, oh, I can relate to this specific feeling that this character is having. I can relate to this reaction that this character is having. And like ultimately, to construct a good romance, it is essentially a character study or 2 character studies, because you have to understand the 2 people and like, who are they? Why do they need each other? What do they work well together? What's their dynamic and why? And like, and that's what makes you so invested in it. So yeah, I agree. I think she deserves more credit, not just for being a good romance writer, but just for being a great character writer and just a great writer. Like, she's also funny. Like, this
funny.
Book, oh my god, this book just left me with a void.
It eats your heart out, and when you get to the end of it, you're like, so do I restart this? Like, what am I supposed to do now? Because it just immerses you into this world so well. And also, I think something she does that is phenomenal is settings. Like, every single one of the settings in her books, I have a very clear idea of the identity of that place, what that place means to the people in the story. And we talked a little bit about that in our last episode, where in Funny Story, like, we see Michigan through Miles's eyes and then through Daphne's eyes. But this is a place that has fundamental and core memory meaning for a group of people. And it is symbolic not only of friendship, but of relationships and of time, and then bleeds into the greater narrative of the book of how do you learn to move on when life is moving past you? And how do you cope with that? Can you cope with that? And that for me was just so evocative of all the visceral and raw feelings, because I feel like at every point in our lives, like we've been attached to a place, right? And it's held a specific meaning for us. And it could either be, thank you, Mitch. I know I'm so right. I think it could be one of those things where it's like your childhood home, or, you know, it could be the restaurant that your family went to as a kid, or a vacation home, like any place that has held significant meaning for you. When that doesn't exist anymore, you kind of feel like a gaping wound in your heart where you're like, oh, well, I'm never going to have that again. And now I look back on those memories differently, in that they're finite. Like, I'm not going to keep building onto those memories. They're done. And that to me was just so, so emotional. I feel like that was almost as emotional, if not more so, than the relationship itself in the story. I was like, it's the relationship with the place.
Yeah.
Just,
And that it's this like kind of cornerstone, touchstone thing of like, if we don't have this anymore, everything else changes, and
yes.
everything else is going to change for the worst. And it's
Yes.
just the anxiety of that is just, I get it.
Yeah, for real. She hit me in the feels with that plot line. She hit me in the feels with everything in this book. It was just, every single thing was highly emotional.
Yeah. Before we go into like full spoiler discussion, we could touch like briefly on the second chance romance thing, because yeah, that was something that I hindered me in picking up the book for a while, because I'd read all her other 4 books. Because I had this idea, and like I am not experienced in reading romance, so like it was all just assumptions on what that trope means. But essentially,
Sure.
it means, right, like second chance. So like they've broken up, and it's about them getting back together. And I was like, I just don't know if I'm that interested in reading about a couple getting back together if they've already broken up, and like there's probably a reason they've broken up, and like whatever. I don't know if I can get that invested. But first of all, like, I should have known Emily Henry was going to give me a good reason.
Yes.
But also because of like the circumstances and how she constructs the plot as well, and like there's time jumps of like past and present,
Yeah.
and the reason of why these two people broke up, and like how real they both feel, that it felt less like a story about two people getting back together and more just about like, you know, changing relationships in your 30s, and like
Yeah.
dealing with what life throws at you, and like external factors, and like dealing with your own stuff that you might have been pushed aside until now, and like all those kinds of things, and like how that affects a relationship. In this particular case, they've broken up, but I feel like that wasn't even the most important aspect of the dynamic. That was just kind of a way of framing it and like
Yeah.
selling it or whatever. But yeah, so I thought that was going to impact my enjoyment. It didn't
That's
at
fair.
all.
I feel like when you told me it was a second chance romance, my brain automatically went to, well, one of them obviously did something wrong. Like that was my
Yeah.
assumption going into it. And I feel like that kind of skewed me initially. I was like, oh, like I don't really want to root for a character that's done something shitty, right? You're like, I don't want to give someone a second chance that's a total, you know, narcissist or whatever.
Yeah.
But the way that she writes the two characters, you're like, no, I independently love both of these people and I love them together. And it hurts my heart that they are both independently suffering. Like it just, oh, so good.
And the reason why they broke up makes sense.
Yeah.
Individually.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and I've realized this, that one of the many aspects Emily Henry does well, a lot of her stories, that the dynamic between the romantic leads is based on either miscommunication or just complete lack of communication.
Yeah.
Normally that would infuriate me, because I
Same.
feel like that's a lazy way out. But because she gives them such a depth of emotion and motivation that you understand why they're not communicating, why they can't communicate, adequately. And it adds so much to it. So
100%. I feel like I can't say anything else without spoilers personally.
Yeah. That's fair. I think we can go into spoiler territory.
I mean, it's a romance. It's already a spoiler that it's going to end with a happily ever after.
Sort of.
No.
But okay, so if we're going into spoilers, which like I'm gonna give people a warning of like 3, 2, 1 spoilers. The ending is, I was doing some reading online after I finished reading it because Yolanda hadn't read it yet. And I was like, I need someone to just scream my feelings at because I'm so moved. And like, I cried 5 times while reading this book, and each time it got progressively worse. Like the first time it was just like a little tear, and then I was like, and then like the breathing started going into it and like really crying, and then it was like, oh my God, I'm a mess. And I was like, other people must feel the same, right? Like I can't be the only person that felt this way about this book. And I went to the depths of Reddit to see other people's reactions to this book and Emily Henry in general. And so many people were upset with the ending. And they felt that Harriet deciding to leave medicine was because she was going after Win. And I feel like so many people missed the clear motivation of the end of that book. And I was like, no, this is literally not the point. It's the point that she has worked singularly for one goal her whole life and has gotten to the point where she realizes this is not what I thought this was going to be. And unfortunately, it yields great depression and no joy. And it is the most relatable thing I've read.
Also, on top of that, she's only going into medicine to pay her parents back because they are the ones, like, so she's doing it she's not doing it for her. She's doing it as this is the way to make money and to pay my parents back.
This is the respectable, accepted thing that I have to do. And for kids that have been the overachiever kid, there's a terminology that I can't remember what the exact phrasing is, but it's for kids that are told that they're special when they're children, and it's because that they're advanced. The gifted kid. Yeah. Like I was that kid. Like my parents always, the other adults in the room would like praise me. And I was like, well, shit, I have like a lot to live up to. It was like, I was 5 or 6 when people were already saying, well, like, oh, she's going to be a lawyer or a doctor. And it's like, I did none of those things. But, when you have that expectation on you, generally it does get funneled into a specific line of interest. Like mine was academia, and I worked my ass off in that one particular field. And I really didn't know who my identity or what my identity was outside of that world. And watching Harriet have that experience of who am I if I'm not going to be a doctor, if I don't have medicine, if I'm not with Win, like what kind of person am I? And I was like, this is just so friggin' relatable. And I feel like no other author that I've ever read has really tackled that head on of like, what happens when the goal doesn't work out? Because we often get the heroine or the protagonist where it's like, we have our hero's journey and we get to the culmination of the story and they're rewarded because they've had the arduous journey. But that's not real life. Real life is the majority of people doing the work and going through the process and it's still not working out. It could be for a plethora of reasons in which like you don't get hired, but you've completed your degree or whatever. Or it can be straight up that it's awful and you don't love it. So that for me, like I was irritated when I saw how many people disliked the end of that book. I was like, nope. Because people were like, she should have been a PCP or a GP in Montana. And I was like, did you all miss this point? Like, what is happening? So that for me was a big thing.
That is actually aggravating.
I mean, one of the quotes that I highlighted, and thank God for Kindle, Goodreads saving my Kindle things. But anyways, that's the only good thing I'll say about Goodreads. A happy potter is better for this world than a miserable surgeon.
Yeah, I love that.
I liked it too.
I love that.
And I feel like it's only a partner that would say that kind of thing to you. Like a parent isn't going to say that to you, right? Because like, especially a parent like Harriet's parents Some parents could potentially say that too, but I feel like if you're a character like Harriet, where you've kind of had that parental expectation and pressure put on you for your entire life, they're not going to say that type of thing to you, but someone that genuinely cares about you will say something like that. And that for me was such a profound moment from Win. One of the many. I loved Win so much. Win was such a complex character. Oh,
yeah. I also think that like the Harriet's entire arc as a person in the book is essentially learning to have agency, but learning that she is allowed to have agency and what that means, and that she can make her own decisions. And like you said, like medicine was never her decision. It just like happened because it was an easy way to measure success and to keep getting like praise and like to like fulfill expectations that she feels have been thrust upon her. And her arc is to learn to detach herself from that, which is a really difficult thing to do. So interpreting that ending as, oh, she's just following Win to Montana is baffling to me, because it's like the first time that she's like, actually, no, I'm going to do something that I want to do. I'm going to discover what I would like to do, and like, we'll see what happens. And that is such a scary thing to do. And in a way, like I found it to be a really moving, powerful ending for her to like realize, because she's so anxious about the fact that, oh, have I never made a real decision in my life? And that hit me so hard, because I've had that exact same thing like in recent years of like, am I actually capable of making decisions? Like, have I just done, whatever I thought was either expected or like just whatever, like the entire time. And it would have made no sense to me for her to do anything else. Like, to continue in medicine would have made no sense. For her to not continue in medicine and not go to where Win is, where we've seen that she's happy, would also make no sense. Like, that would have felt like a forced, no, she's a strong, independent woman. Like, it's not that black and white of like, either she's a career-driven person or she's following a man blindly. Like, there's like gray area in between. And I love that for her, the arc was, maybe this like super career-driven thing is not for me. Maybe that's just not me, not just medicine specifically. Like, I don't need to be chasing the next success. Success can look like something different.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that is such a poignant thing, is that success for this is actually something I listened to in a podcast earlier this year, where I was talking about what success looks like for each individual person, and how we have societal's expectation of what success looks like, which is very much Harriet's opinion in this book, where it's, okay, I have a very important career of what society has deemed important and necessary, and therefore my salary is reflective of that. But as a person, what is the definition of success? And this podcast was looking at the question of like, okay, but like, what actually, if you were to accomplish this in 5 years, would you deem that a success? And like, a lot of people were saying, for people that like were struggling with infertility, they were like, having a family, like that in 5 years would be like a success for me. For other people, it was like running a marathon, like pushing myself to different limits to be able to do different things. And more often than not, the responses that people were getting were outside of employment. And it was very much related to your person. And it just went to show for a lot of people how identity was not directly linked to their job. And I think that Harriet is a very clear example of that. And that's not to say that a lot of people don't find worth in their career and in their field, which, like, all power to you. I think that's excellent. I have many friends that are very much that way, but that's just not Harriet's journey. So I feel like if you were to have had her stay in medicine at the end, and or say something along the lines of like, well, I'll stay in medicine until I pay off my student loans, because that's the responsible thing to do. I'm like, so you're signing up for how many more years of being absolutely miserable? Like, this is what we're saying here.
I think the kind of the crux of it is the passion. The passion isn't there. So if she was passionate about it, then that would be one thing. So
yeah, I mean, I kind of created this like end story for them in my mind in the like postscript where I was like, well, they'll probably open their own business together where Win has his woodworking and she has pottery, and it's like this beautiful store that I would never be able to afford and a gorgeous aesthetic, and it would be amazing. And I was like, this is kind of the vibe that I'm going for the two of them. But like when you're reading the banter between the two of them, I always found it really interesting in that Harriet really does come across as like a scientific person. Like she's very calculated in the way that she views the world, she views people, she views relationships. There's not a ton of initial feeling other than this core group of people is kind of the vibe that I got. And really the only place it seems like she's ever been really attached to is this cabin in Maine. And Win is so the opposite of that, where he's like really touchy-feely. He's like involved with his emotions and like very expressive. And then Harriet's just like, no.
So that's another quote that I highlighted is the point is some people live the bulk of their lives in their minds, me as in Harriet, and some people are highly physical beings, Win. And I felt that so much because like the internal experiences, like I face a lot of internal turmoil, but I don't necessarily always externally show it.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot for me to externally show like things going on, good or bad. So I'm like, I see you, Harriet. I see you.
I felt like a solid combination of the two of them, and that I'm not a very touchy-feely person, but like I am a very emotional person, be it positive or negative. Like I've expressed this on my channel pretty regularly, that, and I think Evie even sent me the Kristen Balla thing. Like I'm crying if I'm between a 1 and a 4 on the scale, or like an 8
I'm the same way, but like otherwise,
I need to be very solidly in the middle to like seem calm and coherent, because otherwise it's I'm too stressed and I'm crying, or I'm overexcited and I just don't know how to contain that within my person and I cry. So because I get very overwhelmed. So I felt like when she was describing Win so often, I was like, yes, Win is one of my people. But also I like could relate to the stoicism of Harriet, because I mean, not everybody, but a lot of people have been in a relationship that they might have thought was their forever relationship, and it ended abruptly by the other person. And you're left there going like, what did I do? What went wrong? Like, can we talk about it? And that person's like, nope. And you don't really get the closure or the answers that you're necessarily looking for. And like when she says later in the story to Win that she tried to go on dates, you know, she tried to move on, like she slept with another person because she was so desperate to like stop craving him, basically. I was like, that is perfectly relatable to everyone that has gone through a really terrible breakup, especially with someone that you've been with for an extended period of time, or someone that you really started planning a future with. Like, what do you even do that at that point? And I just felt like it was interesting to watch Harriet be the more stoic of the two characters, but the more we got in the story, those layers were really pulled away. And I felt like at her core, Harriet was still a very young girl, right? Who was really struggling to figure out who she is, what her identity is, what her role is, not only in her relationship with Win, her friendship group, but her relationship to her sister and her parents. Like it was just so layered. And I thought that it was amazing that we got that much in 400 pages, where it was like, and that's just one character of the whole group. I was like, this is so convoluted and complicated for one singular character. And then we have that also with these other people. Like it was just meticulous. So good.
Yeah.
I'm someone that basically, I'm just going to be like, and here's a quote. She mentioned something about like, I'm a mystery to me too. And I'm like, yeah. Like, yeah. I think, well, I shouldn't clarify. I know. one of the reasons why I got really emotional reading this book is because of Harriet and the kind of not knowing herself outside of, you know, her job, outside of what her family expected of her, outside of what her friends expected of her, outside of what even Wen expected of her. Like, she's closing herself off because she doesn't want to be a burden to other people, because that would be like some sort of antithesis of what they've provided to her.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh man, 3:00 in the morning, bawling my eyes out over this book.
Yeah. What really got me in that regard was that, yeah, so when we learned that, like, leading up to their breakup, obviously, like, Win is grieving his father, and she kind of, oh, am I echoey?
A little.
I don't know how to fix that. Has that been the entire time?
Little bit.
Yeah, it's not a big deal. It's fine.
No, it's very faint. I just wanted to let you know.
Okay. Well, anyway, yeah, like, he's grieving his father, and she kind of retracts because she doesn't want to intrude on his grief. She doesn't want to burden him with what she's going through while he's grieving, and he interprets that as her not caring, or like he moves back to Montana, and every time he has to cancel or reschedule, she's like fine with it, and he's like, you were never upset that I wasn't coming, you didn't. And she's just doing it because she doesn't want to be the problem. She doesn't want to be the burden.
Yep.
She wants to be easygoing. She's not doing it because she doesn't care. She's doing it because she thinks that she's going to cause a problem if she complains. And that that hurt me in my soul. And also the fact that like, in this case, they get back together because of the circumstances of, like, their friends forcing them back into the same house, and, like, they spend time together, and they end up being able to communicate and, like, figure out um where they both are, obviously, also because Wayne has had time to deal with his stuff and she has had time to deal, but they could have very easily not gotten back together, right?
Yep.
Even though they broke up because of a understandable but unfortunate miscommunication that comes from a place of, like, who they are and, like, how they do things.
Yeah.
And that touched such a deep anxiety that I'm not even sure I had, that I had to, like, put the book away for a bit and be like, this is actually giving me such anxiety. And I finished it, and I was like, I love this. I'm so, but at the same time, I had this anxious feeling for like a day or two afterwards, just
I did too.
right? Just
Yeah.
like carrying like the heaviness of the emotions or something.
Yeah.
So good, because it was just so real. Like, you're like, yeah, this is how two people would break up that love each other and like want to make it work, but
Yes.
can't.
I feel like grief too was so well articulated in this book because Harriet's feelings of not earning her grief are
Mhm.
so valid in the sense that, like, well, he wasn't my father, so I have to be the strong one of the two of us, even though she loved Wynn's father so deeply. And when the siblings get that tattoo to honor him and they say, like, you're welcome to get it too, she's like, he wasn't my father. Like, I'm not allowed to be part of that inner circle of people. And just kind of navigating your own grief while someone else is grieving more than you and you share the same space is so relatable, because that can be, for family, for pets, like it's just, if you've experienced loss, like that's typically how it goes, that the only other person that would be of equal standing, I guess, if would be like a sibling or, and stuff like that. So Harriet trying to figure out where she can push and where not to push and just trying to be easy, and the fact that we get the context of the fact that she had to be the easy child because her sister was the difficult child. And it's this deep rooted sense of responsibility that's just been instilled in her since childhood. And how do you deviate from that mold was so relatable. And I feel like that was a lot of the greater context of the book of like, how do we break free of the mold that has kind of been established for us? And I feel like each person sort of dealt with that. Like we see that with Harriet in terms of, I'm allowed to break out of the box and do what it is that I want to do for myself. Wynn's was allowing himself to go back. Like he didn't have to leave Montana to be this like bigger, better person like he thought other people wanted him to be. With Sabrina, like Sabrina at so many points of this book was so relatable to me. Like I was just like, oh, preach, Sabrina. Because we were talking about this in the Discord, but like Sabrina being the one that really tries to hold the group together with being the one to reach out, like that is constantly me. I am the friend in the group that's like, everyone doing okay? We alive? Like what's happening? You know, because of the fact that I am someone that moved away and the majority of my friends are in a different country. So like I am always the one that's gone out of my way to reach out. So I felt like Sabrina having to learn that being in different places in different stages of life, even though you're still friends with these people, can impact your relationships was so foundational and heartbreaking. Cause like it's funny to me with Cleo being pregnant because I moved to the States 7 years ago. And I remember when I was moving, I was like, oh, we're finally going to be able to spend so much time with this one couple that we're really good friends with. And they told me about 4 months before my move was scheduled, they're like, oh, we're pregnant. And I was like, we're never going to be hanging out now. Like our lives are completely going to be different. Our schedules are going to be different. And Cleo really trying to process of like what kind of mother she's going to be, how that's going to impact the friendships, like their group as a whole. So relatable, like just so friggin' relatable. And then when you go through that yourself, when you get pregnant, you have all those doubts, those feelings of like, am I going to be letting people down? You know? And she just did a beautiful job, she being Emily Henry, obviously, of showing people what the molds were that people felt that they were stuck in and how they were trying to break free of that. And I don't think there was a singular character in the book that I was like, poorly done. I just felt like it was really applicable to the majority of our characters. And she did a really beautiful job with each of them.
Yeah. They definitely were not one note.
No.
For sure.
Yeah, and it's impressive because, like you said earlier, it's less than 400 pages, and obviously we spent the majority of that time with Harriet and Wynne. Cleo and Sabrina don't get that much time, relatively speaking.
Yep.
And we see them. I mean, we see everybody through Harriet, but like she even points out at some point that like Sabrina is avoiding her for a lot of it. So like they don't have that many conversations like one-on-one. And yet we get a very clear picture of who they are and what they're going through. And we understand why they're behaving the way they're behaving and what their anxieties are. And like the house being sold was so upsetting to me.
Oh, so upsetting. I had such a similar reaction. I was like, but why does the house, like all of you guys should buy it. Yeah. I had that exact reaction. I was just looking through the book because I wanted to make sure that I had the right wording for it. But I also loved the progression of the chapter labeling in this book. In that we had real life, happy place, dark place.
Oh yeah.
Because I just feel like memory as a whole is obviously imbued with such positive emotion because or just strong emotion, not positive emotion, but strong emotion because of the fact that that's what makes it memorable, right? And it's either a very strongly positive emotion or a very strongly negative emotion. Like I don't feel like we remember a lot of the middling stuff, you know? And her recounting the dark place moments in this story just like brought me back to every breakup that I'd ever had. And I was like, oh yeah, this is how I felt. And in the previous relationships that I thought were gonna, you know, go the distance, I was like, oh my God, like I'm there again. Like I am reliving the very raw feeling of that relationship ending. And I don't think I've ever had that with another book before. Not that I've read many second chance romance novels before, or second chance books in general. This is it. But I feel like we are exposed to people lamenting about relationships all the time, right? And it be it in film or in book, like people have memory and it's foundational of who they are. But the way that it was handled in this book just tore my soul out. Because like you guys were saying, the miscommunication trope is one that I'm really not particularly fond of. I find it really irksome because the majority of the time you're like, why aren't you two morons speaking to each other? This would be so easily resolved if you just said like 2 words. In this case, though, the miscommunication really was just life and being busy and tired and frustrated and sad. Like it is so natural to fall in a stasis of not communicating with your partner during those moments of being overworked in terms of Harriet, or not wanting to encroach on your partner when they're grieving. And from Wynn, looking at it from the perspective of like, why don't you care? And I think we all know both of these people. Like we've all known a Harriet and we've all known a Wynn. And when you pair them together, you're like, this is the natural outcome that's going to happen, where you need someone that is expressive of their emotions and their reasoning and their feelings. And then you need someone that kind of meets them with that. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was just so beautiful to see how by the end of the book, Harriet is working her way towards that. Like she's not fully there yet, right? She's very much a work in progress, but her challenging Wynn at the end saying like, are you telling me what to do? Like, is that what you're doing? Because I thought the whole point of this was that I would make decisions for myself. And here you are thinking that you can tell me how I feel and what I think and what it is that I should be doing. And I loved that. Like, it was just such a positive thing. And it's like, you are allowed to choose a partner. Like that can be the right decision for you. And that isn't something that we should be looking down upon in the context of like, well, she should have been a career woman, she should have been like a modern woman. It's like, you can still do that, but you can choose what you think will best benefit you. Like your job is something that is limited hours throughout the day. Your partner and your happiness is all the time. So it was just one of those things that the whole journey of relationship and trust and relearning trust, because that was another really big thing, is like, how do I trust you when you've done this horrific thing to me?
And when they don't even trust themselves. Well,
yeah,
and they don't. Yourself,
so. Exactly. And it also extended to the friend group, right? Like mm-hmm. Sabrina really broke their trust, and then her boyfriend's name is escaping me. Well, fiance and then husband.
Parth?
What's his name?
Parth or something like that.
I think that sounds correct. It was a weird name.
It was a weird name.
But with him, like reading the text messages, even though it was accidental, with him withholding that information from Wynn and then kind of orchestrating this plan with Sabrina, like there's a lot of breach of trust in this story, and learning how to overcome that with friends, your partner, and your family. I feel like too, because she kind of has that moment at the end with her mom. Like her mom is pretty terrible throughout this whole book. I'm not a big fan of the mom. Not a big fan of the mom.
No. But I liked, we don't get that much of her relationship with her parents. We like get more of like the effect of the lack of relationship. But even like just the bits that we see of them, I didn't like them, but they're also not like horrible, like like they're not abusive, or like they're not like, oh, these are like objectively terrible parents. Like I like that nuance of she's would be entitled to be angry at them and like to want to distance herself, and like we understand why she is the way she is, but also it's not a situation of like get out of there. So I feel like very often, especially, well, actually I can't generalize about contemporary romance because I haven't read enough, but I feel like it would be easy, and we see this a lot in like movies and stuff as well, where it's either an idyllic relationship or it's an objectively like horrendous relationship, or it's a bad relationship that then gets fixed by the end.
Yeah.
I also appreciated that it doesn't get fixed as much as it's just Harriet saying, hi, actually, this is me. And like you said, like she goes on that path rather than
Mhm.
magic happy ending and the parents are all happy about it. It's going to take some time.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll never be happy about it, but it's all about Harriet accepting that rather than about her parents changing their mind. And I really like that.
Yeah, I valued that with the sister too, especially because the parents have a very different relationship with Eloise than they did with Harriet. And I just appreciated because I was a very, my parents are not Harriet's parents, but my parents had very different expectations of me than they did of my sibling. And I was very resentful over that fact. That for me, it was the expectation was here and the bar was here, whereas my sibling, it was like here. And we were very happy if we hit that bar for them, and then, you know, not happy if we didn't hit that bar for me. So when Eloise reaches out to Harriet in the end, I was like, I get this. Like, I very much get this, because in that situation, I very much related to Eloise. And then at the end of the book, when Harriet says, you know, Eloise and I still don't have much of a relationship, I'm like, that's real life. Like, that is very much real life. It's something that would need to be cultivated and worked on regularly, which she says that they're trying to do, but it's still very superficial. And I was like, yep, like I 100% get that. It makes very clear sense. Which is also why I really struggled with the dynamic of the parents. And I feel like only adds further depth to Harriet's character, because it's like, not only have the parents set these expectations on Harriet, but they've almost single-handedly forced that wedge between the siblings of how differently each of them is treated and regarded. And when Wynn meets her parents for the first time, and Eloise says like she needs to leave because she needs to get to work, and her mom's like, who gets their makeup done early in the morning? And she's like, brides. And I'm like, yep. Like, anyone that's ever been a part of a wedding or been the subject of a wedding themselves, like, most of the time your makeup is done. I was in a wedding where my makeup was done at 6 a.m., you know, and it's like, it's horrendous, but that's the reality of the situation. I was like, and they're looking down upon her like she's some piece of garbage. I was like, what is this? It just, I felt at some point or another throughout the book I just felt for so many of the characters. Like, really the only people that I didn't feel for were her parents. And also that like douchey doctor that kisses her in San Francisco. It's like, get out of here, you know, like, absolutely not. But everyone else, for the most part, has something about them that you're like, yep, I can connect with that, or feel sympathetic to that character for that reason.
100%. Yeah. That actually, you mentioned the doctor and like Wynn meeting her parents. Love Wynn. Love Wynn, we love Wynn. He obviously struggles with like his self-esteem in a lot of ways. And like expectations, but in a different way to Harriet, more than he feels like nobody had any expectations, and he's like, yeah, sure. So like whatever. Nobody ever thought I was gonna do something interesting or important, so I guess I won't. And the thing is, like, you're reading it and you as the reader and Harriet as well are just like, no, of course not. Of course you have value. Not just because you weren't great at school, or like you aren't interested in an academic career, or like you are not interested in like a career, like whatever. Of course you have value. You have all of these other things. However, there are multiple characters throughout the book that do treat him like that. Like her mother sees him like that. It infuriated me when she like takes her apart and she's like, I mean, you're not gonna like end up with him, right? Or like, and like her doctor colleague who's like, oh, the furniture guy. And you're just like, oh, fuck off.
Yeah. I was so mad too. I was like, you are the worst. Get out of here. Oh man. Just
but that is so real, because you want to tell Wynn, like, no, of course not. Get over yourself. That's stupid. Like, people are gonna value you. But the reality is that there'll be a lot of people out there that will feed into that exact insecurity, and that he has that insecurity for a reason. You just need to, I guess, learn to not give it that much value or weight.
Yeah.
If it's people see you like that, then they're not the right people. But that's another arc and another journey that he had to go on, and is just as kind of mirrors Harriet's, but it's different. It's like a flip side of the expectations thing. And it made complete sense to who he is. And she gives out to him for like talking down on himself and like just, being self-deprecating all the time. And yeah, I just wanted to give him a hug.
Yes, I had students that were like that. So I taught at a school for children with dyslexia. So obviously, for a lot of them, learning is very difficult. And I had one kid that just like, he was graduating that year and he was like, I'm kind of at a loss. And I was like, what do you love? Like, let's get into what it is that you love and let's start there. Like, it doesn't have to be your value and worth is attached to your career, what monetary value that's going to bring in. Like, obviously you want to earn enough that like you're not going to have to worry, right? Like that's the goal for a lot of people. But to struggle so deeply with the feeling of inadequacy from childhood all the way through, especially in Wynn's case, when you're dealing with siblings who are very gifted. I had one student that was very much like that. He, super bright kid, super bright kid, had terrible dyslexia. And this was a 6th grader. And he was at our school, and his brother was at the top private school in Richmond and was a straight A student. And like he would lament to me and like get teary over the fact that like his brother was so much better than he was. And I was like, you see things in a way that he doesn't. Like your brain is your brain, and like what you offer the world is not what he's going to offer the world. So you can't connect your worth and your value to what your sibling is going to give us, because you're going to give us your own things. And Wynn is such a prime example of that his sisters are also creative people, right? Like creativity kind of seems to run in that family. And then Wynn has his own way of expressing that, and it ends up being very successful for him. But it's just learning to accept that and lean into what it is that works for you rather than the expectations that have just been given to you, rather.
Yeah.
But so relatable from both Harriet and Wynn. You can look at it from both POVs. And like, I never really had any moments in the book where I looked at Wynn and I was like, oh, this is so annoying. Like this again. And it's just like, I just, every time he felt that way. And I was like, who did this to you? Like, I need to know who did this to you, because you clearly offer so much value. And like the way he speaks is so articulate. In terms of the way, like, of all of the characters in the book, my favorite dialogue was 10 out of 10 times Wynn. I loved it. Especially when he picks her up from the airport, like at their first meeting. The banter in that scene is some of the best banter I've ever read. Just chemistry 10 out of 10, banter 10 out of 10. Oh, the whole thing, perfection. And he is such a caring person. Like when the relationship is really starting to build, he's the person that really prompts that by asking her these questions, because he's genuinely a curious person. So yeah, I just feel like there are so many different moments of the book that we kind of attribute, or the characters rather attribute their worth to what outsiders have told them. And it is a journey for those characters of learning to accept what it is that they want for themselves. And we even sort of subtly got that with the secondary characters, right? With like Cleo being an artist when they first meet her, and then she decides she wants to up and be a farmer. She's like, I might still have art in the Met one day, but like, I don't need to worry about that right now, because I'm happy doing what I'm doing. And I loved that.
I think it's the kind of the dual-sidedness of relationships with others, of the expectation versus the support. So it's a fine line of someone seeing someone else's view of them as either an expectation on that person, or
Yeah.
supportive of that person. So I think that was really, really well done.
I think that's an interesting point. I hadn't really thought about it in those terms, and I think that's pretty spot on for at least Wynne and Harriet, and subsequently, I think some of the other characters at different times of the book.
Yeah. Well, even Sabrina, like at the end, because her dad's multiple marriages and stuff like that. I think Harriet mentioned something about when Sabrina like runs away. She's like, she runs away because she doesn't think she's worth chasing after, or something.
Yeah,
along those regards. And so her fiance, Parth, right? I think is what
you think it's Parth.
Yeah, okay.
We're assuming it's Parth.
And then he's like, "Oh shit!" Runs after.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another like prime miscommunication that makes a lot of sense, though, right? Because probably we don't get like Parth's point of view. We don't know what he's thinking, but it's evident that in his mind, like, she's run away because she needs time, so he wants to give her the time and space, whereas she's running away because she wants to know that he will come after her. And like in this scenario, somebody's there to be like, oh, this is what she needs, and he does it and it's fine. But it could have led to a much bigger rift if he just doesn't go after her, and then she comes back and she never says anything, but in her head she's just like, yeah, I'm not worth chasing, you didn't care. Which is just hurting me.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too that I feel like that's also so relatable, in that characters and people that present a very strong facade, which Sabrina does. Like, she comes across as not necessarily like an aggressor, but she's an aggressive person. Like, she's an attorney, she's very self-assured, and she knows who she is. And you get that immediately from the second she walks on the page. You assume that people like that don't have insecurities, right? Like, we kind of get caught up in what they're presenting to the world. And it's, even her fiance kind of like blanks on that for a minute, where he's like, oh shit, yeah, like there's so much going on behind the scenes that I just didn't even think of, because Sabrina is this really strong person that I know and I love. And we get caught up in that so easily that we kind of just lean into the facade that people put on for us, which I think that happens multiple times throughout this book, where you can look at Harriet looking at Wynne, and then Wynne looking at Harriet going, you're happy, right? Like, please tell me you're happy. Like, you're happy now. And every single time he asked that, I was like, no, she is not happy. Fix this now. I was getting so mad.
I mean, that shows really how well the facade is working. Like, when you're lying to yourself so much that like you're able to convince other people that I'm fine. Like, again, that external like internal turmoil, like you've got it locked down so much that you're not letting anything out. So that I'm happy is believable. So
I mean, the whole them being forced together thing, this is something that like sort of happened in my life, where my ex and I broke up, and 6 months later we had both already planned a trip to spend New Year's with our friends, like our mutual friends. And I hadn't seen him in 6 months. And I had like told my now husband, I was like, you need to keep me away, because like, I'm not going to emotionally know how to process like what's going on in front of me. And I felt all of the things that Harriet was feeling, in terms of like the familiar scent, the familiar touch, the familiar just comfort, right? And it's so easy to lean back into that without necessarily dealing with the problems that come along with that. And in my scenario, those problems were never dealt with. And vis-a-vis, we're not together. But it's a slow burn for Harriet and Wynne, and just seeing how, I think, Yolanda, you said it at the beginning, like the evolution of a relationship, right? And it not necessarily being a second chance romance. It's just how relationships change over time. And I feel like that's something that we don't get enough of in literature, because we love the thrill, right, of something new and exciting. And we view relationships that have been established for an extended period of time as almost like stagnant and boring and dull. But like, I feel that you can do such amazing things with showing how people grow independently, and then how that affects them growing together. in that they might not necessarily grow together, they might grow apart. And I feel like for Harriet and Wynne, that was very much that, right? They've been together for like 10 years, and you think you know someone so well when you meet them at like 22 that they're not the same person at 32, and they won't be the same person at 42 or 52. Like, we are constantly we're evolving beings, like that's just how it is. And I would love to see more of that in stories and fantasy and romance and whatever, just like showing how relationships change over time and how people change in those relationships.
Let me publicly say
Is this Persuasion?
You should both read Persuasion by Jane Austen.
I tried after you
second
said
chance
it.
romance.
I tried and I could not get into it. I'm so sorry. I did like the first 4 chapters and I was like, oh, you guys gonna be so disappointed. But I'm gonna try again. I just feel like it might have been the narrator of the book I was listening to really wasn't working for me.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I'm gonna give it a try again. But I do love that. Like, this is very not related to Emily Henry, but it was one of the things that I really loved about Stormlight Archive, and that we had an older couple. And I was like, oh, that's so great, because like we don't see what relationships look like as like a second chance thing later in life. Like, I loved that about it. And I felt very similarly to this. So yeah, I would just love if we got more of that in our stories. I think it would be wonderful.
For sure. Yeah. Like, I will read Persuasion this year, Evie. I promise.
I'll buddy read it with Yolanda, so I'm like compelled and forced to read it. Or finish it rather than just read it. I will finish it. But yeah.
Nice.
I will say, as an aside, tangent aside. So I am not a prude. Let me just put that out there. I'm not a prude. But
a good start.
I don't like the spicy stuff generally. But I will say, I very much appreciate Emily Henry, now having read all of her books, that she prioritizes the female satisfaction over the male dad gabbit, whatever. So
I agree.
Yeah.
That is something that I very much approve of. And also, like, one thing that I'm starting to notice more in not just the contemporary romance that I've read, but romantasy lately, is that there is actively mentioning consent in these books, where it's like, we talked about that with Funny Story too, with like Miles kind of being like, are you sure? And then in this story, Wynne is very much like, are you sure this is something you want to do? And gets that confirmation before he proceeds with anything. And I really do appreciate that. Like, it's not something I ever really thought like, oh yeah, I would appreciate this, but I'm like, oh, I get it. Especially in contemporary romance, in the world that we live in, where like a lot of the time we are dealing with, essay and like all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, it's just not necessary in books. And I feel like the way that she kind of tackles it and handles it is really, really great. And it's almost categorically that, like you said, Evie, it's for the woman. Like, they come first in terms of prioritizing pleasure. And I love that, because I feel like the books that were available when I was a younger woman were very much directed at the focus of like pleasing your partner, right? And it was like what you can do to please them. And I look at this now and I'm like, no, it's both partners and they should also be working. Great. Let's raise a generation of women that get this. So, like, it's one of those things that I really do love it. But I also just like the way that she handles the intimacy scenes in her books. And I really loved in this one, especially too, because so much of the intimacy isn't like, triple X rated intimacy. It's very subtle and it's sweet gestures. And like the big one that stuck out for me is when she has the recollection of when she was blackout drunk. And she says that she wants the rodeo t-shirt that he brought. Like, I want the rodeo t-shirt. And he says, like, arms up, baby, and like that kind of thing. And it's just like, it's subtle, but it's intimate, right? Like, you're not going to be addressing someone like that you like, typically you're not addressing someone in that kind of way if you don't have that relationship with them. Yeah. And I loved those type of moments between the two characters, because it was like, he brought that for her. You know, he knew that she would want it and things like that. And I just felt like the way she handled intimacy as a whole was so perfect in this book.
Yeah, because
I
she's
loved it.
also using it to build character. And like, if they're being physically intimate with each other, they're being vulnerable with each other. So
Yeah.
you're also being emotionally vulnerable with each other. So like, she's using that to tell us more about their relationship and who they are.
Yeah.
So it's there for a reason. So yeah, I think she's really, really good at bringing it into the narrative and like making it necessary, basically.
Yeah.
I was gonna say earlier as well, because you said you were talking about like um wanting to have more stories about like established relationships.
Yeah.
I felt like, because of how this is constructed, this was kind of us getting a contemporary romance that's just like whatever 7 8 years or whatever it is into a relationship, as opposed to just meeting, falling in love, getting together.
Yeah.
Which, don't get me wrong, I love it. I love the like angst and the pining and like
Yeah.
the chemistry as much as the next person. But more often than not, even like in movies as well, like it annoys me when like, oh, they get together on the last page and I'm like,
Yeah.
well, it's only a happy ending because you're choosing to end it here.
Yeah. And then what? Yeah.
Exactly. And then what? And like, it always bothers me. Like, sitcoms are the worst for this, where like
Yeah.
after 2 seasons they get together and then they're together for a season. They don't know how to write them together and make
Yep.
it interesting, so they have them break up for some stupid reason, and then they break up.
Ross and Rachel. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely kills my investment in that couple. Because sure, then like with the Ross and Rachel example, they get back together, but like they get back together in the last episode. How do I know that they're not breaking up again? Like, of course
Oh,
they're going to break up again.
they definitely broke up again. There is no question that Ross and Rachel broke up again. But I agree, because I actually was thinking about this not that long ago, in the sense that romance is fun for something like frivolous for my brain, right? Where I'm like, okay, I don't really have to think too much about it. I can get invested in a character and a story in a place, that's fine. But what if I want to read about a relationship that actually has to deal with having children or paying a mortgage, you know, and like life? And so often that's just not really the case, because we focus so much on that initial interaction, the angst, the build up to like, when are they going to be physically intimate? Like, that is really a lot of romance that we see in stories. It's that initial spark. And unless you are like a serial, dater, that's just not the reality for the majority of people. Like, the majority of people is that you have that a couple of times maybe in your life before you settle with, like, settle not being like, oh, I settled for this person. Like, you decide mutually, like, you're the person that I want to be with. And that a relationship just revolves and changes. And I feel like we just seldom get what real relationships look like. Like,
Yeah.
what does a relationship look like for people that have had kids previously and those kids have left? Like, or, there's just so many different options and different potential to have character work and relationship work in our stories. And I would love just to see more diversity with that. And I feel like Emily Henry has 5 books that are contemporary romance, and I feel like each of them has been different, which has been really great. And one of the things I also really value about Emily Henry is that the characters aren't 20. This is a big thing for me, because I'm like, I don't want to read about an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old that's like, oh my God, I found my soulmate. I'm like, great, good for you. Come back to me in 5 years and tell me if you're still with your soulmate. But I love that it's, it's older people. And like, for this group, I would say that the 2 favorite books would be Book Lovers and Happy Place, of her 5 stories. And the characters are all older. Like, Book Lovers, they're very much in their 30s. And I feel like Harriet is 30
I think so.
in this story, around there, like 30, 31. So I love that. Like, I just think it's so relatable.
Yeah, it is, and like it's also like just what you said. Like, if I'm reading about a 19-year-old character and like, oh, I'm heartbroken, I'm just like, oh, you'll
Yeah.
get over it. Like, trust me.
Yeah. Yes.
So I struggle more to get invested. It's different, I think, if it's like either like historical fiction or fantasy or like whatever, because then it can be different in terms of
Yeah.
expectations and life experiences and stuff like that. But specifically contemporary romance, I feel like if the character is significantly younger than me, I can't take it seriously.
Yeah, I don't either. I struggle with that. I'm getting to that point just in general with characters. Like for fantasy too, I'm like, oh great, you're 18. Like, cool. And I fizzle like very quickly with my interest. I'm like, where are our older protagonists at? Like, bring them out. Ugh.
So I know that Emily Henry doesn't do like. I feel like it's a normal romance thing to be like, oh, we're starting this series like with these characters. Now we're going to follow these, these secondary characters that were in this book are now the primary characters in this book. She doesn't do that, but
Yeah.
I do wish that she would write a whole novel about Cleo and Kimmy being parents, being moms at the farm, maybe Cleo painting or something like that. I don't know. I would read the crap out of that because
I would too.
Cleo and Kimmy are like, they're not perfect, but in comparison, they have the healthiest relationship out of all three of the couples. And
Very
it
much
was
so.
just so sweet to watch those two, and so sweet. But
I loved that not only the fact that they did have such a healthy relationship with each other, but the fact that Kimmy also had great relationships with each of the people in that friend group. Like that to me was so nice, and that it's not, she's just like an extension. That she genuinely feels like she's part of that collective. I loved that.
Yeah. I would love to read that.
Fan fiction. Somebody write it.
Start petitioning Emily Henry. Be like, we have your next book idea. Please get on it.
Also, this is such a minor thing, but I love that all of her books exist in the same universe, and that we keep getting references to, particularly January and Gus from Beach Read, and like their books just pop up.
So many books. I love that. And the fact that like Charlie and Nora have edited or worked on like books and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, our next one will probably be talking about I don't know if we'll be doing them together independently, but I think maybe we'll end on Book Lovers if we do them independently, but we'll have a lot to say about Mr. Charlie Lastra and Nora. Yeah, but all in all, Happy Place for me was my happy place. The both times that I read it, it was just such a moving book. Like I have been preaching this book now from the rooftops at people. I'm like, has everyone heard about Happy Place? Because I really do want everyone I know to read it, just because it was such a raw and emotional book for me. Like there's no question this will be one of my top 5 books of the year. Like it might be my top book of the year. I feel like it's going to be pretty hard to beat, which I never really thought I would be saying my book of the year might be a contemporary romance, but here we are.
Yeah, this is definitely going into top books of the year for me. I will say in my 8 days of binging Emily Henry books, that it made me, Aaron's gonna hate that I'm saying this on the internet, but like it honestly, I swear to God, not a joke, helped my marriage. Like it made me realize that, we don't actually communicate as much as we think. Like Harriet, I internalize a lot of stuff. I should talk about how I'm feeling, what I want, that type of thing. And yeah, so
I love that. I think
thank you, Emily Henry.
The best type of book that can make you reflective of your own experiences and how you can apply that to your everyday life. I definitely felt that way too. Like it very much made me psychoanalyze my marriage and my relationships with like my core group of friends. When I got to the end of it, I was like, oh yeah, like this is very relatable for certain things. But the main takeaway for me with this book is learning how to cope with your dream not coming to fruition and not working out the way that you wanted it to, because this is something that I've talked about not in depth on my channel, but like it's something that I talk to Josh about quite regularly, in that I still struggle with my identity that I'm no longer in academia. I'm like, but who am I without being an academic? Because that literally was my goal for like 27 years. Like that was it. And I just loved it. Like the way she handles that whole emotional journey for Harriet just felt so, I could reach out and touch it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Christine was just saying, I wanted to highlight, if you get further into the romance genre, you'll find those stories. I think when we were talking about like older characters and like established relationships.
Give us names, Christine. Specifics. I want them all. Yeah, because I will say, like, the only two that I've read really have been Emily Henry and Abby Jimenez. And my experience with Abby Jimenez was really interesting in that I read her Part of Your World trilogy, which is kind of what Evie was saying, and that the characters are all either mentioned or are characters in the previous books, and then they get their own story. And then I started this earlier series of hers, and I read the book, but I hated it. Like, I just did not like this book. And like, I'm not a person that actively gets on a soapbox when I really dislike a book, because I just don't like giving bad publicity to books, because I'm like, you know what, you did a thing, like, good for you. Unless it's a book that deals with like unnecessary violence and, you know, essay towards women and stuff like that, in which case I'm like, avoid. But with this book, the main love interest was just so unlikable, and the female character was also so unlikable. And it was interesting that like she's a very good case for giving authors a second chance, especially if you start with that book and then go into the Part of Your World.
Second chance.
Exactly, right? Second chance romance and second chance book for Evie. But Abby Jimenez and Emily Henry, I feel like, do share some similarities in that they tackle more difficult themes that are then kind of put under the romance genre. Like the Part of Your World trilogy deals a lot with severe anxiety, like crippling anxiety, abandonment, PTSD, mental abuse from partners and stuff like that. So like it is really heavier reading, I found, than Emily Henry was, but I feel like Henry also tackles very difficult topics, but does it in a way that feels more natural almost. Like it's not like jarring when I read it. I'm just like, oh yeah, like of course the character would have that, and that's why they're reacting that way. And I just felt like the best case for that was Happy Place. It's not clear, guys. I really love this book. Just been
in case there's any doubt.
Yeah. When I ordered the physical books after I read them, I listened to them, and I did immersion with the ebook and audiobook for all of her stuff. And I then went and I ordered these books, and Josh was like, these are the brightest books I've ever seen. I was like, I know, they don't blend in with the shelves at all. So I've had to find a place for them. But yeah, I'm just like loving this book. Thanks, Chadia. Yeah. You too. Have a good night.
Good night, Chadia.
Yeah. Emily Henry.
Emily Henry. I love that our initial idea of doing a 2-part book club of like 2 books and then 3 books has quickly become, okay, so each book from now on is getting its own chat.
Its own chat, yeah. Which I almost kind of wish we would have done that from the beginning, because I reread Funny Story and I just picked up on so much more. Yeah, I reread Funny Story when Evie read it, and then I reread this when Evie read it. So I picked up on a lot more than on the first go around, and I feel like it's probably my second favorite of the bunch. Initially, I was thinking it was probably my last favorite, or least favorite, not last favorite. Battle Royale. Okay. I'm gonna look at these.
Yeah.
So what I've learned, Laura, is I need to reread Persuasion so that you can pick it up.
That is the key. Yes, that is the absolute key. But I would
I
be
do reread it all the
curious.
time. So yeah, just
I
let
would
me
be
know.
curious if you reread Beach Read, what you would think of it. Because now that like you're more comfortable with her writing, I feel like you might view Beach Read differently.
Without the
Also, I
epilogue.
want to
That,
get the UK version
I
because
can send you my ebook that does not have that ending.
yeah,
um
strange.
yeah.
I was actually trying to find out like where that came from, and I found like a clip
So
of her
weird.
talking about it, and like she said that just her editors talking about like different markets and stuff, like for the UK
So
and the US.
Americans need a happy ending and the UK is like, fuck it. You can just be moderately happy.
well,
Yeah.
so it might have been the same clip or maybe a similar one where she was talking about it again, but that because Beach Read and People We Meet on Vacation were earlier on and they were published in the different markets like a little bit wide, not at the same time. Now that they're close together, she can work with both of her editors to
Yeah.
find that medium
Middle
of
ground.
satisfying, middle ground.
That
There
makes
you go.
sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. And I will say that I feel looking back on it, People We Meet on Vacation, I do think is probably the worst book of the bunch, even though I still had a great time with it. Like I really, really enjoyed it. I don't know. Book Lovers for me isn't as top as it is for you guys, and we'll get to that when we discuss it. But it'll be fine when we do. I'm excited to.
I'm very excited. We can like organize when suits and like figure out time zones and all that kind of stuff. I am
Yes.
impressed
It
that
is
I'm still awake.
1:30 in the morning, for God's
It's
sakes.
Yolanda's the
1:30.
MVP, guys. Irish time happening right now. Oh my god. We'll try to make it that it's like more middle of the day. The next time.
Or
we
Laura
do
and
it.
I stay up until 1:30 in the morning.
I can't. I will like I don't first of all, I don't drink caffeine, so I don't have that as an option.
I was
And
trying to figure out what that would be for me. I think that's like 6 a.m. for me, so that doesn't
yeah,
help.
it would just be even worse. But yeah, my kid is up at 6. So like I've gotten to that age now where I'm like, if I ended up having I was doing sprints in Tori's channel a few days ago with some people, and we stayed up chatting till like midnight, and I paid for it the next day. I was like, oh, this is what it's like to be in my 30s now. So yeah, doesn't work.
I
We'll figure it
definitely
out.
paid for it, staying up until 3 a.m. to read Happy Place. But damn,
Yeah,
was it
but worth it.
no.
Worth it. Oh, I can't remember the last time I stayed up to finish a book like that. And it's like it's special when you have that attachment to a read, right? It's just like
Yeah.
it's like a high almost that
Yeah.
we just do chasing as readers. It's so good.
I was walking to work on the whatever, like I read it over 2 days, and like on the second day, I was walking to work and I was reading the book as I was walking, or like pausing, like whenever there was like a red light, I would just like stop walking and like wait and like just read like a paragraph, and I was like, this is
That's amazing.
very inefficient actually, but I can't stop doing it.
That's amazing. I love that so much. But that is what this book does to you. Oh, it's just so good.
It's very good. Okay, cool. Will we wrap it up then, and we'll schedule part 3 at some point in the near future. If anybody isn't subscribed to Evie's and Laura's channels, go remedy that. I think I've linked to them in the description. If I haven't, then I'll fix that. And yeah, thank you for stopping by for either the happy place bits or just the general conversation. Happy to have you. I will learn to get better with the chat sometime.
Maybe if it's not 1:30 in the morning. Thanks for having us. Thanks, everybody. Let us know what you thought of Happy Place or what your favorite Emily Henry read is, and we will keep you posted for our 3rd chat.
Bye.